Hello, hello. I am making a response to Unreal DevOps' workflow on how you can match mesh pivot to the skeleton bone. Specifically, it's bone's head offset, where it starts, and how you would be able to do it in Blender. So the process in Blender is entirely different. I started a third-person sample project where I'm gonna test it the same way on the Unreal 4 Mannequin. And I exported the mesh to start with, and I'm just keeping the blueprint in the sample here for the easy access here to later on pattern the, let's call them Gibs, onto the character mesh, so we have those static mesh components usable for chaos physics simulations. So for starters, let me just start it all over from scratch. Okay. I'm using Blender 4.1, and after I have exported character mesh with stock settings that it comes with already, let's put here scheme Mannequin FBX. Yes, I would like to replace it. I changed nothing here, but you probably want to get rid of collision and static mesh. If you export static mesh, I don't need level of detail, but vertex color sometimes can be useful if you'd like to retain it in your own work, depending on your workflow. Anyway, going back to Blender, and I'm hitting import FBX, and I am clicking on the specific mannequin that I have just exported from the Unreal 5.4. You don't really have to do anything here. You don't really have to do with access on bones. It doesn't necessarily matter so long as you export it with the correct spaces. Either way, here's our mannequin. I have it in my elements collection, and root 001 here is because I have the other one in the file. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Your skeleton will be named root. So let's, for example, start separating our character's loose parts. You can do it in Blender easily by left-clicking in edit mode. You can switch between object mode, edit mode, and many other. Right now we only need object mode, edit mode. You don't need anything else. So by clicking here and going to edit mode, or if you have a pie wheel, do Control Tab and then select the mode that you'd like. I'm using face selection mode. So if I click on anywhere and I press Control L, it will select every mesh that every single face that is connected between each other. So we only have this part of a leg, but we don't have the inner part here. So I'm gonna hold left shift and left click on the next mesh that we think is supposed to be connected, and do Control L again. Now we have the entire leg. I'm probably gonna do the same thing on the gimbal here. As you can see, the hard surfacing is done through symmetry. That's why I have to select it twice on left and right. Either way, this is the thigh that we're gonna work with. Next I'm gonna do is separate it entirely from the character object. So I'm gonna separate it here and separate selection here. And I can go back to the object mode. Back to the object mode, if you look at the transform pivots, especially starting from the root, which is essentially your skeleton, we call it armature in blended terms, but it's still a traditional skeleton that is used in Autodesk, 3ds Max, Maya. Either way, once we separated the mesh from the character mesh itself that is bound and parented to the armature itself, I'm gonna select this mesh that we just separated, and on the right side, or that is by default, you can click between those menus. These are your property datas or editor types. Once you click on this object here by just the left click and click on the wrench here, which are modifiers, this is where we keep our modifiers. You can remove the modifier called active armature. This is the one we use in order to utilize the weight panes made for each bone to follow whatever armature or skeleton it is done for. So I'm just gonna remove this one. That will make my duplicated separate pod not move with the skeleton. I am in pose mode right now in order to rotate the character's bones while it follows. But if I had that armature still in my modifiers and click the one that is currently available, and I would move the skeleton, that will keep it moving. I move it with double tapping R and press escape to cancel all the edits. I go back to object mode, click on the separate part, removing the modifier again, so it's clean. Now, the question is, how? Let me just do the viewport display here while clicking on the armature in object mode and make it wire and show in front. How can we use the head of the bone as the origin point or the mesh pivot for the leg to follow it properly, so we can export this thigh as a static mesh and use it for nanite and for chaos destruction solutions? So what can we do here is honestly a bit convoluted, but we're gonna try our best here. So I found it to be the most precise I could ever go with after researching it for a while. So in object mode, you click on the armature, then you go to the edit mode. On the edit mode, you will be able to select the bones that you're looking for. You will see the name of the bone that you click on here. This is where you're gonna see to what armature it's bound, what's its name. And I'm currently using the select box tool. You can just click on it and it will select the entire bone for it. But if you just click on either of the ends, this is the beginning, the head, and this is the tail of the bone. The reason why it's not placed correctly in Blender, it's because it imports with wrong rotations. It's possible to import in order to fix the rotations for the skeletons, but it's not exactly necessary when you export it with the correct forward axis and Y axis. And that wouldn't conflict with the character meshes and their skeletons if you try to pattern them to Mannequin, for example, if you use the same skeleton. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna select the bone, the bone head, and there's a feature called the 3D cursor. 3D cursor is used as a determinator of transforms, and we can use it to fetch the current transform of a bone we're using. But it's not that simple. If we're gonna try and align the cursor to our current selection, by pressing Shift S, we will get a context menu allowing us to tell our cursor where to go or what to do, or tell the selection what to do. So in that case, I'm gonna tell the cursor to go to selection. This is where it's going. Now it's in the middle of a starting point, or where the start of the bone is, which we would like to use as the pivot. But in order to see the current transforms that the cursor is inheriting from the bone itself, we can see that it's already taking the location transform from it on XYZ axis, but there is the problem. It doesn't take rotations. So in order to make sure that it takes rotations, you have to make sure that when you select the cursor tool on your side, make sure that when you go to a side panel here, or press N by default, it will open up for you. Click the tool tab, and it will allow you to see tools options. And there is orientation currently available, and surface to surface project. Surface project allows you to place it on whatever mesh is in front of you being projected that is visible. As you can see, it tries to align with what you try to cast it on. I prefer to put it off because we don't need it right now. And the orientation, we don't want to take rotation from the view, if I'm gonna project it again, and if I rotate my camera, it accounts the rotation. We want to put it to transform. Orient to the current transform setting. And I'm gonna press Shift S again and tell it to go back to the selection. Now, you can see here, it still has the same rotation from my last projection. And whenever I click on anything when I have the transform orientation, it now has 0. And even if I tell it to go back to the head of the bone, it says it's 0. That's the problem. So, how to fix this? There is a little menu on the top that allows you to modify your selections. You can change the transform orientations, you can change transform pivot points, you can change them to either median point, that is of the median point of the selected objects. We want to keep it on active element. For the snapping, proportional editing, you don't need those. This is specifically for edit mode purposes on meshes, or snapping. If you're familiar with Unreal, snapping is literally the same. In transform orientations, we are able to change in what format are we looking to align our rotations and transformation axis to. Either it's going to be global world space, either it's going to be a local of the current object, or like the skeleton. Let's say this armature itself, and with the skeleton, we're going to be grabbing transform specifically from the origin point of a skeleton. Then it's for the normal, in terms of meshes. The gimbal, the Euler rotation that we don't really need. Then view, depending how you view it, this will account for the rotation. Cursor, which is not what we're looking for. And parent. You can add your own. And what we're gonna do, we're gonna make sure that we go to edit mode and select the box. Click on the bone itself. Go back to the transform orientations, click plus. Now, it has created us a new orientation that is going to be based off of this bone. So anything that is in this bone should be accounted for in the transformation. So we're gonna go back to the 3D cursor, and I'm gonna press anywhere in the world. As you can see, now it keeps the rotation that is relative. In the center, if I click making cursor go to active, usually the rotation is being calculated from the bones, the head's position and the tail's position, and then it comes with the roll, which is like the bone's rotation around head and tail, allowing you to change its rotations that way, but also allowing you to change it the other way, where you just move it around and it changes the bone's behavior on different axes. That's not what we're looking for right now. We're just gonna go back to putting the cursor back to the selection. Once this is done, now we can see that we are inheriting proper location transforms here and rotations that are taken from this bone specifically. Because we are using our custom transform orientation from the selected bone. Awesome. Great. This is only for one part, by the way. You'll have to do it for every single bone, which could be time consuming. But next, what we're gonna do now, in order to present that it's possible in Blender, you want to select this mesh. And while your 3D cursor is still here, make sure it's not misaligned anywhere, and it keeps the same rotations. You can see what's 3D cursor's current transforms here. Now you want to click on this object, and first of all, you have to make sure that it's unparented from the character's skeleton first. So I'm gonna put it in my collection above the socket that importer comes with from Unreal's export, and currently our leg has disappeared, because if I'm gonna press numpad dot, it will center my view onto the leg. Other thing to note is that Blender's scene base metric scales in unit system is metric as default, and unit scale is at 1. Unreal is working with centimeters, so you want to put 0.01 here, or if you want to work with just individual project, you can go, since we unparented it from the skeleton, while it's under the socket that is of scale of 1 centimeter instead of 1 meter, since it's outside of the socket, I prefer to keep it outside in order to keep it consistent. That's just my workflow. I'm just gonna put everything at 0.01, which is 1 centimeter, and it's back to what it's supposed to. Sweet, great. I'm not even gonna apply those transforms yet. No need to. I need to keep them in order for the export to properly recognize that they're in Unreal units. So I'm gonna click Object while in Object mode, selecting this separate gib. Set origin to 3D cursor. Origin is the main pivot of the model. So right now, as you can see, if I'm gonna rotate this in Object mode, the pivot is in the 0, coordinates, meaning anywhere I'm gonna move this object in object mode, it will always be orbiting the 0 coordinates. In order to put it in again, to put the origin to the bone, we're gonna put origin to 3D cursor. Once this is done, and then when I move, now it's following this specific bone offset. Next, what I want to do is I want to apply, I want to make sure that this gib is looking good for export. So I'm gonna put all the transforms to 0, and this is how it looks like. How am I gonna debug it to make sure that it's gonna look well instead of just constantly exporting and importing to re-importing in Unreal Engine to see that it matches my socket parent? Constraints. Constraints in Blender, I'll give you many tools that allow you to make certain objects follow the other, or limit certain transforms, copy certain transforms, lock, damp, clamp, track, aim, and so on. So in this case, I'm gonna make it a child of. Once I make it a once I give it a child of object constraint, I'm gonna give it a target of a skeleton called root. And which one was this? Thigh. Let's do thigh L. Now, you can copy location, rotation, and scale of the specific bone. As you can see, everything seems to be in place. Here's the problem. When I set inverse, I shouldn't have touched that. I was just not doing it right. Let me redo child of, I'm sorry. Thigh L. Now it's following the bone itself. If I were to move this bone in pose mode, it follows it too, despite it not having the armature modifier, but we have the object constraint to the bone. The problem is it's misaligned. The reason why, rotations. Okay, how can we fix these rotations? Pretty simple. In item subpanel, when you have the thigh selected in object mode, you can play with rotations. So in this case, I want to make sure that it aligns here. If I put 90, it's supposed to work right, but it's following the bone's offset specifically. But it's not correct. So we want to align it properly, and eventually we'll be able to mirror it on the other leg. Right now, it's incorrect. This is the closest I could go with the current test. You will have to play with those values, because if I were doing it without setting a proper, how to say it, because with the body parts, specifically in the mannequin, that's not something I would recommend doing, but it's the closest that we can go with. That could be adjusted in engine. I couldn't find anything that could get the most exact transforms, but this is the closest we could go with. So this is how I would debug it. This is how it would look in Engine. If there is a way better way how to do this, guys, because 3D cursor doesn't by default match any kind of rotations, I don't think of any other way that could work if you try to get this mesh pivot work in Blender specifically. But now I'm just gonna apply, not do anything here. I'm just gonna hide it. It will remember those rotations that I did. Once this is done, I'm gonna go ahead and export this specific object as an FBX. Export as FBX, gonna go back to this. I already have an operator preset set for Unreal 5, so I'm gonna select only mesh, object type. Selected objects, make sure you limit it to selected objects. Transform, make sure scalings are all local, because you already have everything set here. You don't want to apply them, because they will be already transferred on export. Unreal will account it. Forward, -Z, up, Y up. This is how it usually is. Mostly with Unreal 5 mannequins, but good enough. Geometry, do not bake animation. Also untick this. Geometry, face, apply modifiers. You don't really need to change anything here. But the armature for later, if you export it with armature, primary bone y-axis, secondary bone x-axis. Once this is done, I'm just going to create a new FBX. I'm going to name it die L export. Now I'm going to open this folder where I exported it. Open Unreal. And let me open the Gibs folder and add this FBX. I could build Nanite with this. Generate missing collisions. It could do this for us, no problem. Convert scene, correspond x-axis. You don't really need to do anything here. You could possibly work with import rotations in order to fix it, but I didn't. So I'm just not gonna search for any materials and not gonna create any import. This is all I need. This is the leg. If we want to use Mannequin's material, feel free to do so. It will recognize everything because we still have EWV maps. Mesh. I'm gonna drag it down to a new form Mannequin. Parent to thigh L. Thigh. What is it? There it is. That's the closest thing that we could go with. And do you see the difference? I can't really tell you. Seems to be 1-to-1. If I were to make it visible, and we just untick it and see it, yeah, I see some difference. It's just incorrect in the front. Still needs some work, but this is the closest I could go with this current pipeline, how you can do it in Blender. 4.1, I believe all the versions work too. I work with 3.6 the most, so I'm pretty sure it can work. This is the closest we can get. So yeah, I hope this helps, and let me know if you have any questions. I'll be more than happy to help. Peace.